Hello again, this is Miss Diane from Finkelstein Memorial Library, and today we are going to make chocolate chip scones. So, you will need 2 cups of flour, you'll need 1/3 cup of sugar, you'll need 1 whole tablespoon of baking powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So now we're going to grab our whisk and we're going to whisk all of the dry ingredients together. This way we know that everything is all incorporated and all of our baking powder and salt is spread out evenly along with sugar, so everything rises nicely. Alright, that looks good. Okay. So next we're going to cut in our butter. Now this is 6 tablespoons of butter. I've already pre-cut it, but it should look just like this, small, slightly cubish. And you want to make sure that you use cold butter. If your butter is room temperature, it's going to melt right into the flour and you won't get the right consistency for your dough. So we're going to dump that in there. Alright. So I'm going to use a pastry blender, but if you don't have one, a fork will do, or a couple of knives, whatever you fancy. So we're going to cut in our butter, and all I'm doing is mushing the cold butter into the flour mixture until I get something that resembles pea-sized clumps, kind of like large breadcrumbs. So I don't want the butter to melt completely into the flour. I want it to be lumpy. That took longer than expected. So you can see now that we have some clumps of butter still in there, and they're around pea-sized, and we are ready for phase 2. Just gonna get all that butter off there. Okay, so next we need 1/2 cup of heavy cream and 1 egg. I'm going to crack my egg into the heavy cream. And I'm just going to give it a good whisk while it's still together. You do not want to whisk this in your dry ingredients. Good. Now I'm also going to add to my wet ingredients some extracts. Now we're making chocolate chip scones, but if you wanted to make fruit scones like dried fruit or even fresh fruit, although that gets a little messy, you don't have to have extracts. They just make it more fun. So for today, with our chocolate chips, I've added 1/2 teaspoon of orange extract and 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. So together they should be pretty good. We're going to add that into the wet ingredients because it's way easier for that to incorporate. So we're going to dump this right over the top. A little bit of lemon or orange zest would also be really nice in this. Great. Okay, and we're going to start mixing. Now, because this turns into such a stiff dough, personally, even though in chocolate chip cookies I add the chips last, with scones I like to add the chips before all the liquid's incorporated into the dough. This is 1/2 cup of miniature chocolate chips, but you can use whatever you like. Alright, so our dough forms pretty quick. Now this is a super stiff dough and it's pretty floury. And you want to make sure that all of the flour is incorporated as best as possible but you don't want to over mix it or you will have really tough scones. We are almost there. That looks pretty good. Okay, so your dough should look just about that. So it still looks a little bit floury, but for the most part, everything is incorporated. So on to step 2, we're gonna shape our scones. Our dough, we are going to make this into 3 different sections so that we can make 12 scones out of this batch. So I'm going to start by grabbing a fistful. I'm going to make sure you start with clean hands. And I want my 3 lumps to be roughly the same size. I just eyeball it. You should find that all of your dough clumps together once you squeeze it, kind of like a good packing snow. If you have the consistency of packing snow, you've done it right. Great. Alrighty. Just gonna grab the crumbs here. Okay. So once we have our 3 dough balls, we're gonna flatten each one down into a little disc. Now I'm using a baking mat. You can also use parchment paper, or you can make this on a greased cookie sheet. That's fine too. I'm just patting these into circles. You don't want to make them too flat. They should be just about an inch-ish thick. Almost ready. Okay. All right. So before we cut them, this is a great time to brush the tops with a little bit of milk if you want your scones nice and browned on top, or you can just add sprinkled sugar. I'm going to add some sprinkled sugar because I think it looks really pretty on top. A nice decorative sugar so it doesn't really melt like regular sugar, but you can use regular sugar too if you like. It just won't, it'll melt a little bit more. Okay. All right. So now we are going to divide each ball of dough into quarters, and we'll get 12 scone wedges. You can use a regular sharp knife. You don't have to use a bench knife. Okay, so you want to separate these little guys out so that they have air around them when they bake. And then we're going to bake them at 425 for around 12 minutes, but really it could be 12 minutes, could be 15 minutes. It really depends on what you've put in your scone. And if you have a more moist dough, like if you've used fresh fruit, it's going to take longer to bake. I like doing things like a white chocolate chip scone, maybe with some fresh raspberries, is super tasty. Or you can do a lime flavored scone with fresh raspberry, also very tasty. You could even do toasted coconut and chocolate chips. The sky's the limit. Okay, so we're gonna put these in the oven, And again, that is $4.25 for around 12 minutes for this size scone. If you wanted to, you could make these a little bit smaller, and they would cook a lot faster. But this is pretty manageable. All right, so our scones are out of the oven. It took exactly 12 minutes. And you can see they have a nice golden brown edge to them. So a toothpick also, as soon as it comes out clean, will indicate that it's done. And just so you know, this recipe came out of Joy of Cooking, but there are many other variations on scone recipes out there. In fact, with this one, if you didn't have butter and egg handy, you could just increase the heavy cream to 1 1/4 cups, and you'd have a really nice cream scone, and they're super easy to make and very tasty. All right, well, I hope you enjoy your scones. They're excellent with breakfast or tea or coffee, and we'll catch you next week.